And welcome back, fellow American patriots and Minutemen standing at the ready to fight anew for the issues that matter in the way they matter at the time they matter. That time is today, February 4th. And I want to continue the discussion here at Sierra Podcast that we've been talking about all week about how Republicans and Democrats are really working in tandem to kick all the power to the courts, to continue passing budget bills that bankrupt the country and really don't change policies, including on immigration. We're being sold out on this whole Minneapolis neo Confederacy. We have this one directional national divorce. And who is speaking out for us? So later today, we're going to have on someone who's been fighting for the forgotten American worker, fighting for immigration restriction for 36 years. And we'll get her take on what's going on. But I got to tell you, folks, what happened yesterday with the passage of this government funding bill ending the so called partial shutdown was such a teachable moment and is emblematic of everything the Uniparty stands for, that they'll fight like cats and dogs rhetorically. We're on the verge of civil war. Oh my gosh, we're on opposite sides of immigration. And look at what happened in Minneapolis. But then, in the way it actually matters, on the funding bills, money makes the world go around. They're exactly in tandem, but they just work together to make sure that the result that they want flows, which is the status quo, but that each one gets to posture in the way that benefits them. And just to start off today, I know a lot of you listen in the car on iTunes, but it's worthwhile subscribing to our video here at YouTube Horowitz Show, because I want to show you a graphic presentation of the vote on yesterday's minibus bill as it occurred, and I'll narrate it. Notice that it passed 217 to 214, so basically one vote. And it was so close. And oh my gosh, we don't know if we're going to get the government funded. And if you notice, there were 21 Republican no votes and 21 Democrat yes votes. And you might think this means, oh, well, obviously, most Republicans wanted it because it's a right wing budget and most Democrats didn't want it. But in fact, as we well know, before the Minneapolis shooting, Democrats were completely on board with this bill. They actually praised 5 out of the 6 departments of it, like HUD and Labor HHS, which actually spends more money, codifies Biden's priorities. And even DHS, they tolerated. It wasn't like there's anything in the DHS bill that ends judicial review, the judicial tyranny, sanctuary cities, things like that, empowers red states to deport, to criminalize legal immigration. It doesn't do any of that. And in fact, it doubles H-2B visas. It also has this unaccompanied minor amnesty in it as well. So they were fine to vote for it. They just needed something to show their base. They're fighting in light of this Minneapolis shooting. So what happened was they basically got they knew conservatives opposed it. The few that there are, the few conservatives that are there opposed it. But then, well, they needed Democrat votes. But on the other hand, Democrats needed to lodge their protest that we're against DHS. Now, if you remember, this bill does not fully fund DHS. It fully funds the other liberal departments and policies at the Biden levels for the remainder of the year. But then it only funds DHS for 2 weeks. And by now it's really until next Friday. It was 2 weeks when it passed in the Senate last week. So this allows Democrats to make pretend like they're fighting DHS, but ensure that this gets passed. So now they get the funding they wanted for everything else, and now they could cleanly fight DHS on next week's deadline and say, "Hey, we're not gonna give the votes for this in the Senate, which Republicans will need." And this way, they could move the contours of debate rather than making the DHS bill stronger so we could deport people without judicial supremacism. it actually makes it worse. And the contours are now the status quo, which honestly Democrats were willing to tolerate before the posturing, versus possibly making it even worse and putting some restrictions on ICE. And John Thune already announced that he is open to doing more short-term CRs, meaning giving into the Democrat tantrum. But again, let's go back to that vote. Notice how they got the votes they needed. Now, let me tell you this. If the overwhelming majority of Democrats really oppose this budget bill, as indicated by the vote tally, that only 22 of 210 Democrats voted for it, you wouldn't have had the 22 Democrats, including leadership members, vote for it. It was all kabuki theater of who gets a hall pass. They both know that this preserves the status quo. Trump was calling Republicans to vote for it. He was on the phone. You had his staffers on the phone pressuring conservatives, and they peeled off just enough. And then other ones that are running for higher office, they gave them a pass. And likewise with Democrats, they know, all right, you need to show your base you're fighting, but they ultimately know that the bill does nothing offensive to them. And in fact, the way it's structured with the staggered funding per, long term for everything else, only a week and a half for DHS, and then they get to fight it cleanly. They were fine with it passing. They just didn't want their voters to think that they're even affirming the legitimacy of ICE's existence. So they got 22 Democrats to make sure it passes. This, my friends, is the kabuki theater of the Uniparty on display. But it gets worse than that. I want to play a clip for you of Mike Johnson speaking to reporters about, it was 50-50. It wasn't clear he'd get it passed. And they didn't have the votes because more than 21 Republicans opposed it. There were a few more, but they magically, as always, get peeled off with a Trump call. But Johnson revealed something very interesting, very, very telling about one of the members, John Rose from Tennessee, who originally opposed the bill. Again, as a conservative, you would oppose it for two reasons. You would oppose it because the bloated funding levels of everything else, and the fact that you give them that while giving DHS only a week and a half, so Democrats can now fight it cleanly. And suddenly he gets peeled off. Now, first off, you had this fake thing with the SAVE Act. The Senate's going to push a talking filibuster. By the way, John Thune denied that. He said, we never reached such an agreement. So that whole thing that was given to the Freedom Caucus was a lie. And again, even if they would do it, then why don't they do it on the actual DHS bill? Meaning, if you could force a talking filibuster, and maybe it will take a week, maybe it will chew up a lot of floor time, but what else good are they doing on the floor anyway? Well, why don't you chew up a week on a DHS appropriation bill that defunds sanctuary cities, that defunds lawsuits against red state enforcement and against federal deportations? Okay, things like that. Why don't you reform immigration through it? Why don't we do that? Why is it just the SAVE Act, which is kind of perfunctory compared to this, which is much more real and enduring? I mean, I support the SAVE Act, but it's not nearly as transformational as this. The answer is this whole thing is kabuki theater. So anyway, back to this guy, John Rose. What he was struggling with and why he was going to get a hall pass originally. Take a listen to what Speaker Johnson had to say.
Promises you make to John Rose to get a TS?
No promises. John is engaged in a tight race for the governorship of Tennessee, and he's thoughtful about that, and he wants a fair fight there, and so that's what we discussed.
So between the lines, Speaker Johnson is saying, well, we have to be mindful of the fact that this budget bill sucks and the base doesn't want it. And we know that the base doesn't want it. And we know that in a competitive primary, despite the fact that we have unfortunately, very few competitive primaries, their opponents will use it against them. You're voting for Biden-level spending. You're voting to give Democrats what they want on DHS, to isolate it for a week and a half so they could fight it without the other funding bills. So they know the base doesn't want it. So they said, well, yeah, he has a governor's race. He wants to run for higher office. He wants a fair fight. So between the lines, what he means is that one of the other candidates is Marsha Blackburn, who's running for governor as a sitting senator. Well, in the Senate, it's not as much of a narrow majority. And also Democrats, there's a different dynamic in terms of, the Democrat base, that the House members need to show their members that they're fighting Trump. Whereas the Senate is more, they know that there's no there in the DHS funding bill. So they don't need to posture. So half the Senate Democrats actually voted for it. So Marsha Blackburn was able to, I could just vote no for my base. Whereas John Rose, they needed his vote. And Rose evidently complained to Johnson, like, wait a minute, this is not a fair fight. So this whole thing is a joke that Johnson and Trump know the base doesn't want this. But continuing on year 6 of Trump's presidency, 2 terms, where every budget bill he passes basically is an airball or codifies leftist policies, codifies their spending levels, knows the base doesn't want it, and it's all kabuki theater between Democrats and Republicans. How do we get this passed, albeit making sure the members on both sides that need to posture to their base in primaries get to do it? That, my friends, is the kabuki theater on display. That is everything you need to know about the Uniparty. We don't have representation. It's really that simple. And the whole thing is kind of pathetic. So this leaves us with Democrats. Now it's signed into law. And now Democrats are refusing to pass the remainder of it, the one bill. So in other words, all of FY 2026 is funded, except for DHS. And they're saying that they're basically going to fight it unless you require a warrant and due process, and they can't wear masks, even though they're being doxxed and targeted, and they can't use crowd control against people that are trying to kill them. So that is that. So you understand now the contours of debate are between, you see how the Democrats moved over the goalposts. Really, the mandate is to deport illegals. That was the election mandate. But instead now, Democrats get to see, how much are we going to grind down deportations from the current baseline that are already paralyzed by the courts? See, we should be talking about a DHS bill loading up with jurisdiction stripping. Instead, now it's about ICE stripping. And a win will be just the status quo, which is a loss for us. Maybe that will happen in the end, maybe not. But now the Democrats have more leverage. So this whole thing was a boondoggle. And again, the Trump administration was on the phone with the members. And again, by the way, if you look down that roster of who voted no, to Speaker Johnson's point, among the Republican no votes, so some of them were, the usual guys that always vote no, like Chip Roy and Burleson and Andy Biggs. But a lot of them, and including some of those, they're running for higher office. So just don't tell me that you don't realize what the voters actually want. You do. Because it's just a coincidence that the ones that are running for higher office, they always, and by the way, I won't mention names here, but including some of those that are obsessed with Trump and obsessed with Trump's endorsement, and everything is Trump and MAGA on the red hat, but somehow they vote vigorously against Trump's very key priorities that he's whipping for. That in itself is kabuki theater. Because again, if they were really going to oppose Trump on this, which as a conservative you actually should, Trump wouldn't endorse them. So this whole thing is fake. They give out hall passes as needed while ensuring they have the votes to pass it. I just wanted to elaborate on that because I felt that was such a teachable moment there. But anyway, one other thing before we get to our guest, just to underscore the need for jurisdiction stripping, but also just to say no. So yet again, an Oregon judge, Michael Simon, issued a ruling barring ICE from using crowd control munitions. And again, he begins his ruling with a political screed. Our nation is now at a crossroads, and helping our nation find its constitutional compass, an impartial and independent judiciary operating under the rule of law has a responsibility that it may not sink. So when they say independent, they mean that they have the power to do whatever they want, define the contours of their power and the other two branches of power with finality, and they don't have to stand for re-election, and they're life tenured. No, I'm sorry. You don't stand for re-election and you're life tenured precisely because you don't have the power that the political branches have. You have less power, not more power, plus the benefit of not standing for re-election. That is power King George never held. But anyway, to the point we've been talking about, what is the power of a court? A court doesn't have the power to say, ICE, you can't use crowd control. Like, you don't have that power prospectively to determine policy of what munitions to deploy when dealing with a riot and attacks on their agents. What you have power to do is retrospectively, if anyone feels that they're wrongly harmed, you could bring a civil suit against ICE and say they wrongly pepperballed me and I got injuries and you sue for injuries, and the court has to determine who's right. But at a policy level, that is what we have elections for. As President Lincoln observed during the 6th debate with Stephen Douglas, during the 1858 race for Senate in Illinois, he's talking about how courts could adjudicate individual cases, but if they seek to use those rulings to give standing as a way of settling a policy across the nation, obviously it should never be regarded as a political rule to be, quote, binding on the members of Congress or the president to favor no measure that does not actually concur with the principles of that decision. His attorney general, after he became president a couple of years later, Edward Bates, he's a former congressman, he explained at the time, quote, that is the sum of its judicial powers. Meaning, what is the judicial power? Ample and efficient for all the purposes of distributive justice among individual parties, but powerless to impose rules of action and of judgment upon the other departments. It's that simple. Courts literally do not have that power. People who thought they did, they were the disciples of Dred Scott, Stephen Douglas, who felt that courts could rule that blacks are chattel and, Fifth Amendment property rights of slave owners. And at the end of the day, the president, either with Congress or alone, has to say no. You don't have that power. Madison and Federalist 48. A mere demarcation on parchment of the constitutional limits of the several departments is not a sufficient guard against those encroachments which lead to a tyrannical concentration of all the powers of government in the same hands. So if you just say, oh, well, courts don't have the power. That's what the Trump administration surrogates are saying. Okay, but then you go and you give it effect. So if you give it effect, then, my friends, what is the point of those parchment demarcations, as Madison mentioned, if you're not going to enforce it? If you have a statute that says a judge cannot review these cases, for example, TPS status, and then you go and continue it and don't deport because you're listening to the judge who's defying the statute, so you're the one defying the law. At some point, you got to say no. And if you don't have the guts to do it alone, then you have to demand in a DHS appropriation bill or in another must-pass bill, or frankly, now that we have this magical solution of enforcing a talking filibuster for the SAVE Act that got conservatives to support this crappy DHS and omnibus bill, which John Thune said he's not going to really do necessarily, but supposedly we have this. Well, why don't we pass a bill saying judges cannot review this? But instead now the contours of debate have been moved over, that the right goalpost is now oh, the status quo. If we would just have a no runs, no hits, no errors DHS bill, if we could force Democrats to do that now, and we have less leverage to do so, so that's a win. But what is that? That's garbage. We have less than 3 years on the clock. Democrats will almost assuredly take over, probably with very, very large margins. So yeah, this is better than under Biden in a static analysis of the here and now. But if that's the best we can do in between two Democrat presidencies of importing 10 million people each, well, that's a problem. So how are we going to move this forward? So with us today is a new guest to Blaze TV, and I want to explore how do we take the political realities and limitations of the Uniparty that we're dealing with to try to salvage something, force multipliers, what needs to be done to right the ship. I would tell you folks, there's a marquee poll out, and it's one of several that shows despite all the negative PR, and frankly, the president really not using his bully pulpit effectively, not saying the things we say, the legal and political and economic arguments we make. Still, Markey has 46-44 plus 12 support for full deportation of illegals. That doesn't even couch it dangerous or criminal aliens. So it is still popular, but the other half of that poll is Democrats are winning in generic ballot +7. In other words, they will get back in mainly because of the economy. So you may as well floor the gas pedal right now on at least the immigration part of this and cement enduring victories. How do we do this? Well, I've been doing this for a while. I've been fighting immigration for 20 years. There is someone who's been doing this since I guess I was out of diapers, but I was maybe 5-6 years old. Rosemary Jenks, she's co-founder of Immigration Accountability Project, an organization you need to be familiar with. She's basically been a lobbyist for the forgotten American worker, the forgotten American taxpayer, the forgotten American culture. She has been fighting for immigration sovereignty for 36 years. She's been a great friend. We've worked together on so many issues, and I've never had her on, and she is with us today for the first time at Blaze Media. Hey, Rosemary, I can't believe it's taken this long. Welcome to Blaze TV.
Thanks for having me, Daniel, and also thanks for aging me so very well.
Hey, even I'm here with the gray hair, and I'm glad you mentioned that because I don't want to be doing this for the rest of my life. And I feel like the dog caught the car, where the president in his executive orders, there's weaknesses, there's the student visas, there's some of the things he said about workers, but in general, he has finally shut off most of the Middle Eastern countries, the diversity visa lottery, the refugees, going down a lot of our bucket lists. But thanks to the Antifa insurrection and the judicial tyranny, it's grinding a lot of this to a halt that if we had Trump as president for 100 years, yeah, this would be fine. But for what we need to get done in this narrow window, it's insufficient. I want to get your general thoughts on where we are and the imminent nature of this, how we need to really, really utilize this window we have.
Yeah, so I think we have to acknowledge that President Trump has done some amazing things that we have not seen before, including basically shutting down the border and cutting off immigration from 39 countries and so on. But I think we need to recognize that the immigration debate is not just about who's coming in and how many anymore. It's a political debate. It's about how much power the left can gain from importing a giant population. And if we can't talk about the fact that, these riots, they sprung up suddenly when the Minnesota fraud was exposed. These are people who are desperately trying to maintain their power structure, and their power structure involves getting non-citizens to vote for them and to be dependent on welfare and to continue the flow of cash from the federal government to the states, to all these, fake organizations. It depends on the left essentially replacing Americans, because Americans tend to have a little bit of common sense and don't want their country completely taken over by people who have no concept of our history or our values. So, we need to shift the conversation. It's fine to talk in academic terms about, yes, mass immigration hurts American workers. It hurts, welfare costs. It hurts housing availability. It hurts the healthcare system, and so on and so forth. But we need to be real about it now and say this is a political fight. This is the left versus the rest of us, basically. The fact is that all of the things that the president has done can and will be reversed as soon as a Democrat is in that office. And if we can't get Congress to codify these things, we're completely lost. And, unfortunately, even if Congress codifies them, we've got these judges who are willing to just run amok and ignore what the law says. But at least we have something in the law that the Supreme Court can eventually, overrule these crazy judges. But if Congress doesn't step up and recognize the time we're in, then we have nothing once they regain power.
We have nothing. And it's not like we don't have a history of this. Again, we went through this with the first term. There were no benefits remaining in 2021. They reversed it with interest. Each time the Democrat presidencies, from Clinton to Obama to Biden, they get worse and worse. Next time, we can only imagine what they'll do. And they will likely have bigger margins just because of the economy and Republican sophistry and just stupidity. They are going to get back in. So I'm looking, if I had to be like a triage doctor here, to me, the most important things are the judicial review issue. So, Chip Roy had amendments to the must-pass reconciliation bill. He's been trying to push this every way, every how, that we already have some of these provisions in IRA, in the INA, but they need to be more emphatic, broader. We have, and then, defunding sanctuary cities would be number 2. I would like a cause of action to sue sanctuaries that release criminal aliens. So then that applies the courts against them. And then finally, state authority to criminalize, to demagnetize, and if possible, even deport. Because what we all know is it's not if. Democrats are going to come back in. The pendulum always swings back no matter what. And especially now, it looks pretty grim. And you can only imagine what's going to happen then. It's going to be wild. We can't prevent that. And it's partly because of immigration, like you mentioned. With the Democrats have a very high floor of support, and they're always going to get back in power. We at least need the ability to cement enduring victories in states that we know will control, like Florida, and say, you know what, the next 20 million invasion, they're not coming to Florida. But under the current construct, without, Congress codifying that, you understand there's not much states could do.
Yeah. Well, let me start with the judicial review process. So in many areas, the law is very clear that, for example, in removal proceedings, the law cuts out federal district courts entirely. It goes from the immigration judge to the Board of Immigration Appeals to the appellate courts. So there was a purposeful cutting out of the federal district courts. Now, that should be enforceable, right? That should be clear. No federal district court should have any say over any removal proceeding, according to the law. But until Congress impeaches a federal district court judge who has violated these laws, this is not going to change. It doesn't matter how many new laws you put on the books that say no judicial review. Until Congress takes itself seriously, it's going to continue. This is the whole purpose of the Immigration Accountability Project, to hold them accountable. If a judge breaks the law, the judge should be held accountable. If a member of Congress is doing, crazy things that hurt America on immigration, they should be held accountable. When Maria Salazar introduces an amnesty bill, the mass amnesty, she needs to be held accountable. There is no difference. You can add all the laws you want if they are not enforced by either the law enforcement structure, by the judicial structure, by Congress. They don't matter. So
they don't matter. No,
that's the first step.
And that's the thing. I mentioned this point yesterday. I said Ilhan Omar doesn't have the power to do anything. You need bicameral. You need almost usually 60 votes in the Senate. You need the president's signature to do what she would want to do, and people like her would want to do. But if you appoint her judge, which the next Democrat president will appoint people like that judge, we are now told, and I wrote a book on this. I disagree with the premise. I don't think this is the system we adopted in 1789. But that a judge has plenary authority over its own power and over the contours of the other branches. It could determine the scope of what it gives standing for. It could disregard jurisdiction stripping. It could do whatever it wants. And, so then I just need one vote and I'm life tenured. Because you and I both know that even if Democrats crush it on the economy and they come in with like majorities we haven't seen since the early 90s, and that is a possibility, I still don't think they would pass a mass amnesty because they know, and we haven't done it in 40 years, but what we have had is executive and judicial amnesties, and particularly the judiciary, because they don't have to stand for re-election.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I mean, really, there's no disincentive for judges to, control their fiefdoms if they're not being held accountable. And, it just begs the question, what are we doing here? Why are we not totally focused on, does the law matter or does it not? If it doesn't, then let's just give up America and say, okay, anybody in the world can come here. We're not going to do anything about it. We're going to give free handouts until the last dollar goes out of the treasury. And that'll be that. That'll be the end. But Daniel, I have to say, I think there is a possibility that Republicans could, in my perfect world anyway, pull out a major victory if they were willing to stand up and take action. If they were willing to impeach a Judge Boasberg, if they were willing to pass the Save America Act, if they were willing to pass a moratorium on immigration, I think they would become heroes. So the question for them is, a lot of people speculate that they want to be in the minority, that it's easier to be in the minority. You don't have to lead. You just have to follow. You just have to scream and yell and complain. Well, now's the time that we need to find that out, because they have an opportunity. There is a path, I think. And the question is, will they take it or will they blow it?
This is what, so this is the central thing I've been yelling about for a year, and I don't understand it. And we could talk about varying gradations. We would want a full moratorium, but at a minimum, the provisions of the RAISE Act. So chain migration, diversity visa lottery, refugees, stuff that Trump largely already addressed in executive order. So he's on board with it. And even some of the H-1B things where the president's waffled, but he's started to signal some reforms kind of, executively. If you have that in whatever structure you got your random tax provision bill passed that none of us understand what's even in it or could even message it. If you would have used that capital for that, whatever capital they're talking about with the talking filibuster, everyone always tells me, well, what do you want from Trump? You have the rhinos. But the problem is, here's what and I know you follow Congress very closely. This is what you do. What I have found is the 5 years Trump has been president, it's always the conservatives that are trying to find ways to codify jurisdiction stripping, defunding of sanctuary cities, and all this stuff. They're the ones getting the pressure from the White House. Stand down, stand down, stand down. It's never a matter of, I want the RAISE Act. This is my bill. We don't even hear about the RAISE Act this year. This is my bill. I'm going to run around the country, use my robust bully pulpit. I'm going to name names, which he does when he wants to. And look, I can't guarantee success. We have a lot of recalcitrant Republicans, but I'm not seeing that from the White House. I'm not seeing the plan.
Yeah, well, and I think there as you well know, there is huge moneyed interest on the other side of this issue. The Chamber of Commerce, all the big ag and big tech and all of them put billions of dollars into lobbying against the interests of Americans on the immigration issue. Right now, it seems like they're winning with the White House. But I will say, every time President Trump has really buckled down in his messaging and demanded that congressional Republicans do something, they've done it. He's been able to bring them in line.
Oh, boy, yeah.
And so how do we get him to recognize that he's going to spend the next 2 years being impeached if he doesn't demand action from Congress? And that's really what it takes. It will take President Trump coming out hard for something that Americans want. And we've seen little bits of him coming out for the Save America Act, the voter registration, proof of citizenship and voter ID. But we haven't seen him just consistently pound on it and order Republicans to do it. And now you've got the White House negotiating with Senate Democrats on reforms to ICE. No, we don't want reforms to ICE. We want ICE to go harder and stronger and more. So, we're in a bit of a bind here there's no other leadership in the Republican Party. That's just the fact.
No, but it's negative leadership because people like Chip Roy and the Freedom Caucus guys are getting pressure the other way around that they downright don't want it. I mean, Chip he did introduce a moratorium, and it has not been endorsed by the White House. So I'm not understanding what their strategy is. And I before I brought you on, I was talking about the DHS or the omnibus bill with the DHS. So what I'm looking at now is where rather than us saying, we will not fund the government unless the invasion stops, unless the rioting stops, and the sanctuary cities stop, and the judicial coup stops. Instead, we give the Democrats what they want on the other bills, which, by the way, is very revealing how the White House and Republicans, putting immigration aside, it's very interesting that the 11 other approach bills in this amazing, much vaunted capital that we've had from this amazing electoral victory are not even minutely offensive to Democrats. Like HUD has even more, like 7 billion more than under Biden or something. Okay. And DHS, honestly, they were tolerating it. They were going to vote for it until the shooting, and then they had to sort of play to that. So then now they separated out. Okay, we'll give you, now it's 10 days worth of DHS. So now they have a clean shot to fight. And as I was saying, move over the debate to the status quo, which we were saying is insufficient, to making it even worse. What do we do now?
Yeah, that's a good question, because my fear is that the Republicans have lost all leverage by giving up those other bills, because the Democrats really wanted those other bills because they're packed full of earmarks and other junk. And now it's just DHS funding. So the only question for the Democrats is how much do they want to fund FEMA and TSA and the Coast Guard? There will be some pressure there. There's been storms and there will be more, but the leverage is largely gone. The question is, right now it's just the White House and Senate Democrats negotiating whatever the changes will be. That seems fairly dangerous to me.
I don't think they're the changes we're talking about.
No. And some of the demands of the Democrats are just insane. I mean, the idea that you would demand that ICE get a judicial warrant before arresting an illegal alien is crazy. It would essentially shut down all immigration enforcement and become a de facto amnesty. And, we need to call that out, because that's exactly what it would be. And it's just wrong on all of the merits, since removal is an administrative process, not a criminal process, and Article 2 versus Article 3 courts and so on and so forth.
And where is Pam Bondi? Like, this is where you need a megaphone, because the American people, it's easy to understand if you direct people's attention to it, but otherwise, look, I mean, none of us like weaponization. We just went through the whole J6 stuff, and the FBI and locking people up pre-trial for having sniffed 100 feet from the Capitol. So we don't want that, but it's just very simple to explain to people. Look, there's indefinitely locking someone up for the purpose of punishing them. That requires due process, even anyone who's here. And then there is, you break into our country and we just say, go back, have a nice life, we're repatriating you to where you came from. That is an extension of sovereignty. Rosemary, how did we go from 140 years of an uninterrupted stream of case law, where the Supreme Court said over no area of law do the political branches have more control than this? The decisions of executive and administrative officers acting within the powers expressly conferred by Congress are due process of law. They're final. There's Turner v. Williams, 1904. There's no limits can be put by the courts on the power of Congress to protect. Galvin v. Press, that the formulation of these policies is entrusted exclusively to Congress, has become about as firmly embedded in the legislative and judicial tissues as our body politic. Alito, in a 7-2 decision, DHS v. Thursigim in 2020, cites all these cases. Like, they're cited, but there's this weird parallel play where it's there, but then every day lower court judges do whatever the hell they want. Sometimes the Supreme Court enforces it, no, plenary of power, and then sometimes not. I mean, I guess it's just we need to codify it.
Well, but I mean, I'm not sure at this point in our timeline that codifying it is enough, because again, we have to go back to the fact that this is a political question now. So, and I think this happened under Obama's term when he started out, he was talking about, well, we have to have deportations. We've got to stop illegal immigration and blah, blah, blah. He sounded like a, good, solid Republican at that point. And then he started to realize that this is an issue that the Democrats can exploit for voters and for power. And once that happened, and that has been socialized into the fabric of the Democrat platform now, and Biden, of course, just exploded it with the complete invasion of our country. We can't get back to enforcing the law to the congressional, legislative supremacy over immigration. We can't get back to that until we hold judges accountable, until a judge is made an example of. They're going to keep doing it. They don't seem to care if they're overturned by the Supreme Court or by the appellate courts or whatever.
They have to be ignored too, I would argue. You reach a point where if you write in black and white, you don't have authority to review it, and they review it, it is what it is. I mean, I'm not going to go and fly a plane back and grab them and bring them here. I mean, I know, I don't want to jeopardize your bar status, but the reality is that the same way that the president always, both parties, ignores Congress all the time. I mean, heck, the president ignored the TikTok ban, and we don't bat an eyelash. At some point, it can't just be a parchment barrier, as Madison said. The other branches have to enforce. One of my things headed forward is I really am, I'm very down on our ability to get the deportation numbers up because of all these limitations. So then it turns to the other area that you've been yelping about for 30 years, the demagnetization. So a lot of this is, if you made it that they couldn't really reside here with a functional life and work and get benefits and get access to schools and healthcare, most of them would go home. There are signs some of them did, What do you feel the Trump administration could be doing more of executively, and also, again, in this must-pass bill that we want to push, that would obviate some of the need for physical removals?
So, in my view, the only thing that is going to get us to actual mass deportations is worksite enforcement. Because if you don't take away the jobs from illegal aliens, they're not going to leave. We don't have the resources to target enough people with law enforcement to make every illegal alien believe that they're going to be caught and deported. Only when they believe that they're going to be caught and deported will they actually leave, or when they can't support themselves and their families, will they actually leave. So, there are ways to do it. Obviously, Congress could make E-Verify mandatory. That would be a really great step. Alternatively, if you're looking at executive power, my suggestion would be to use the IRS. Every employer in the United States fears the IRS. Every person in the United States fears the IRS. So why not have the IRS, which has, payroll data, social security numbers, taxes, all of it, have IRS send a letter to employers saying, here's the list of people on your payroll whose social security numbers don't match or who otherwise we think are here illegally. You have 30, 60, 90 days, whatever it is, to inform that employee that they either need to prove their legal work authorization or they're going to be terminated. If you terminate them, we're going to give them the, $2,600 or whatever to encourage them to leave. They need to sign up for the CBP Home app and we'll move them out of the country. But if you still have them on your payroll at the end of this period, we're going to audit you and we're going to charge you back taxes for every dollar that you deducted from based on their wages for the last 7 years plus interest.
That's the linchpin. But unfortunately, again, we've seen messaging from the president and the cabinet officials. We're moving towards dangerous criminal aliens, and specifically wants to move away from this. But this is actually politically more beneficial. It's really the palladium of the leverage of this issue. And also it opens up another very pernicious aspect of legal immigration that's extremely unpopular, which is identity theft. Because I want you to go into this because you've been talking about this. I know your organization's been putting out information on this. E-Verify is a good start, but the thing is, it just matches up if you have a social security number. Well, if you steal a social security, meaning if you steal whole identity of the name with the proper, so you take a 2-year-old kid that doesn't really have a paper trail yet, take his name along with the number, so it will match.
Right.
You're telling me the IRS does have the ability, the federal government with the IRS working with SSA and DHS, they could vet out stolen identity in this country.
So one thing that both the Social Security Administration and the IRS have is the information on how many different employers are reporting income to one Social Security number. So if there are 10 illegal aliens around the country using real Americans' identity, the IRS and SSA will see that employers from around the country are contributing to that person's taxes and Social Security account. So they know when there is, multiple use of Social Security numbers. But here's the key thing with E-Verify. E-Verify now has the ability, if states are willing to share driver's license data, to actually do a photo match. So if somebody steals the Social Security number of you, Daniel, then they go in to get a job. They give your Social Security number and your name. It pops up on E-Verify, on the E-Verify screen with your photo. That person's not going to get the job. Right? So you've got to have a multi-factor check there. And it is entirely possible. There are only 10 states that don't share driver's license data with E-Verify right now. And of course, you can guess which states those are. California, Massachusetts, Illinois, New York, and so on. But if those states would share that data, that would solve a large portion of the problem, the majority of the problem. The other thing is that Americans, and every American should know this, you have the ability to lock your own social security number and your children's social security number right now. You can lock them to prevent them from being used for employment purposes. So, anyone in your audience who has young children, I highly encourage you to go to My E-Verify. Just search My E-Verify on Google or whatever server you use, search engine you use, and you can create an account and you lock the social security number. And then if anyone tries to use it for employment purposes, it will be denied.
Wow. So this is over and beyond just the politics and policy of immigration, just in general, as part of the E-Verify program. This is a way of combating it. And again, this opens up an entirely new message that the administration seems to be very desperate in trying to move away from the current paradigm and talk about criminal aliens. Well, how about the fact that there's nothing so nasty as taking a young American, particularly with a Hispanic sounding name, and by the time you're 18, you have a bunch of debt and rap sheet and all sorts of things on your name, combating stolen identity. Because most of these people, even the ones that didn't, commit assault and drug trafficking and drunk driving and whatever, they did steal identity, which is not a low level, harmless, victimless crime, as they always like to say. This is really where I think the administration needs to go with a lot of their efforts in the remaining 3 years. But then the final part, Rosemary, is, the enduring part. And that is, if I had a genie in a bottle that gave me one wish, all this stuff, you pass this in a bill, and I think it would be hard for Democrats to reverse it, because once you shut off certain amounts of immigration, to affirmatively turn it back on, it would be unpopular. And the economy and job market ain't getting better for a long time, unfortunately, for a myriad of factors. So they're going to have to own that. But at the end of the day, there are certain states that will never elect Democrats. And to me, the state and the local governments, they're what's interacting with the citizen every day. It's inevitable you're going to be pulled over by a cop. You're going to have to go to some state or local agency. Okay? If we criminalized a legal presence and had a way of checking it in everything you do, just like every time I apply for a lot of different financial things, I have to show if I'm a U.S. citizen anyway. You have Florida and others try to criminalize the legal presence. Jacksonville tried to do it at a county level, a county crime. If we would be able to codify this, and again, Congress needs to step in, otherwise none of the states are going to want to fight the courts on this. They're all enjoined. Wouldn't this set up a permanent dynamic of, hey, President Gavin Newsom might be opening up the door, but you don't want to come to Florida?
Yes. And I mean, there are some catches there. We need to make absolutely sure. I mean, the reason that our founders put Congress in charge of immigration, gave them plenary power, is because obviously once someone comes into the United States, you can't restrict their movement from state to state, right? So if you give them permanent residence, they can move anywhere. So we need to be absolutely sure that the state authority only goes to enforcement, not to actually bringing people in. Because remember, we've had states that have tried to do this, like Utah. So we need to just get that off the table. But yes, and in fact, there are a lot of things that states can do that they haven't really figured out yet. I mean, my team was the one who talked to Governor DeSantis's team in Florida and explained to him that as the governor, he has the authority to prohibit any state-funded agency from hiring H-1B non-immigrants or any non-immigrants. And he did that with the university system, which is
and
fantastic.
universities are a huge place for that. Yeah.
That's right. And now Texas has an H-1B investigation going on, which is they should. But any governor can do that. Any governor can also require, it should already be required, but any welfare service that's provided at the state level, if they're using federal money, they are required by federal law to use the SAVE system, different from the SAVE Act. The SAVE system is Systematic Alien Verification for Entitlements. It is the DHS database that basically has information on every non-citizen. So it can tell you if the applicant for welfare benefits is here legally, illegally, on a temporary visa, whatever. That database can tell you. It can also do voter registration verification, by the way. But if states were to require state-funded welfare to use the SAVE system as well, and then actually report violators to ICE. They could be at every welfare office throughout the state. Anyone who comes in and says, I want to claim WIC or, whatever the state cash assistance program is, whatever. If they're here illegally, they should be reported to ICE. We should be keeping track in schools until Plyler v. Doe is overturned. We should be keeping track of every single illegal alien child who is registered in public schools so that we can then challenge Plyler v. Doe and overturn it because the costs outweigh the benefits to society of educating the children of illegal aliens.
Or we could pass Eric Burleson's bill that he had last year, a couple others, that Congress explicitly greenlight states to do that. And again, this is the contours of the whole judicial supremacism argument. How much is an exclamation mark on what's already there that the courts are wrong and we're going to do our own thing versus signaling, whatever you want to do with that. But the point is, to your point, I mean, every time I'm in Maryland with one of these stupid traffic cameras that put the speed limit on the highways down to 45 and you get flashed and whatever. All I know is every time I'm in trouble with the law with something like that, even at a state, somehow I can't go in the shadows undetected. Like somehow it will catch up on you.
Yes.
It will catch up with you and they'll threaten, we'll take away your license. I've had this before and you gotta give in. Why is it when it comes to illegals? I don't know, Daniel. We don't have the physical ability to go and take 20 million people. But if you actually just made it that you couldn't function here illegally,
right,
you couldn't remain here.
Right. No, that's absolutely right. And also think about this. If you go into an emergency room and you need, major heart surgery, God forbid, if you're an illegal alien, that gets paid for and you never hear about it again. If you're an American citizen, look out because they're coming after your house. They're going to garnish your wages. They're going to take your car, the whole deal. So yeah, we should not be paying for all of this. But again, this goes back to the fact that this is now a political question. This is about, you can't challenge the extra benefits for illegal aliens because that makes you racist. That makes you intolerant. That makes you a bigot, whatever it is. And the whole reason that the left does that is to protect the political power that comes from mass immigration.
And that needs to be the goal between the must-pass bills, finding must-pass bills, all this stuff in Congress, the states, and fixing the judicial problem. This needs to be etched in our consciousness right in this year. This year is the last year that you're likely going to have to do that. And again, I support the SAVE Act, but to say that you're going to lie to members to get them to pass a bill that's going to sell us down the river on DHS and immigration in return for the SAVE Act, which is still dubious we even get it. But again, I support it, but with due respect to these people, I would argue, and I think you agree with me what you're saying, the mass migration structure that has led to tens of millions of third world people becoming citizens voting Democrat is the much larger problem than actual current non-citizens voting. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but let's be honest. I would rather tackle the immigration elephant in the room than the SAVE Act, than the non-citizens voting.
So I look at it just a little bit differently. We are absolutely 100% in support of a full moratorium on immigration. All of it. Let some tourists in and that's it. And that solves the problem 20 years down the line. Because let's face it, we're not, even if we have mass deportations, we're not going to get, 16 million illegal aliens out of here in the next 10 years at least. Oh, yeah. So that is the right longer term solution. The SAVE Act, I think, is the short term solution. We know we have a giant population of like 53 million foreign born people in this country. Some of them have naturalized, some of them have not. We don't have a good way to figure that out except for requiring proof of citizenship, not just to vote, but to be counted in the census.
In all 50 states, the legal immigrants at least get driver's licenses, and illegals obviously in blue states and Utah. So, and we want whatever immigrants we have that are illegally, you could get a driver's license, but that's a problem. If we have motor voter seamlessly flowing them in, it is a problem. Again, and I agree with you. I'm just saying it's a little ridiculous what happened there with DHS. We're pretty much out of time, but just real briefly, there's one more bucket list here, or item on the bucket list, the H-2B visa. So, look, aside from a few Republicans, the lion's share of them, you could tell it's campaign rhetoric, but they really haven't changed in their priorities. So they're bragging about doubling the H-2B visa cap in this DHS bill. Could you describe what that is and the consequences of that?
Yeah, so the H-2B visa program lets in 66,000 low-skilled, non-agricultural seasonal workers every year. So 66,000 foreign workers come in to take landscaping, construction, hospitality, ski resort, carnival, all kinds of jobs that, we used to do when we were in high school or in college to over the summers, or ski resort instructors are a pretty big draw for American students in Colorado, where I grew up. At least they were. So now we import cheap labor to do those jobs. The wages that these employers are paying is ridiculous, and you can look up all of this if you search for H-2B Employer Hub. You'll come to a USCIS website that gives you all the companies, all the wages, all the jobs that these folks are filling. So Congress, in its ultimate wisdom, with bipartisan support, decided to basically double that 66,000. So in addition to that, they're letting in an extra almost 65,000 in the next 8 months, because this is fiscal year 2026. So, if you have a teenager who wants to get a summer job, forget about it. That job's taken. If you have a kid who graduated from high school and wants to try to get a construction job before he decides what he wants to do and, go to college and whatever, forget about it. That job is taken. So, this is the reason that some of the Republicans are bragging about it is because it also covers seafood processing. So we see some folks from Louisiana, some folks from Maryland, who think that, these industries will just go out of business if they don't have their cheap foreign labor, which of course is ridiculous, because if there is demand for their products, there will be people ready to buy the products at whatever wages they have to offer.
And this is what should have been done in reconciliation last year, in my view. It should have been getting the American worker back to work, easing off of welfare, cutting spending to reduce inflation, and a moratorium on foreign labor. But the problem is we have it the opposite. We have this massive welfare hammock, according to the Heritage Foundation. It's getting up to pretty much a mandatory minimum income of almost $80,000. So then you have that, you have the inflation, and then you have the foreign workers, and it's it's a vicious cycle. And what bothers me is that this was the president's signature issue, and we're on term 2, and we have not passed a single immigration bill. I mean, I guess you had a little of the Lake and Riley bill is very narrow, but dealing with at least some of the fundamentals. And it's like you get one more year of this, 90% odds, betting odds, Democrats are going to win back to whatever degree they win back. And then they'll be out of excuses. This is the time. If you have one more reconciliation bill, whether it's a budget bill, whether it's, I'm going to enforce the talking filibuster, you have a way of doing that. Awesome. You got to do something more, because it's not enough. Rosemary, where can people get involved in what you're doing and track at IAP what you're up to?
So we actually have a really great website at iapaction.com, where we have a congressional ranking system for all 535 members of Congress. And it ranks them purely based on their immigration votes, co-sponsorships, actions. It includes all kinds of information about immigration, all the various visa categories, and so on. So a lot of resources at iapaction.com. You can find us on X at IA Project. So yeah, please check out the website and find out where your members of Congress stand on immigration. We have some great ones, and we have some real losers.
And we need to expand that for governors too, because most of the governors are just awful. Oh my gosh, are they awful? And again, like we're saying, we need to start thinking in the long term about states taking what Florida did, building more. He would do even more there if we didn't have this judicial issue. And again, like, time is of the essence. We're not going to get another 36 years at this. But anyway, I really wanted people to be exposed to your work. IAP, check them out, their website, as well as Twitter. Rosemary, God bless you for joining us. Really appreciate it. And I know we'll have you back again soon.
Thank you very much, Daniel. It's great to be with you.
Take care. So, folks, that was Rosemary Jenks, longtime friend. I don't know why I've never had her on, but she's a machine on the policy, on the legislation, just executive, legislative, all of it. Harvard law grad, who at the time, very rare thing to go into immigration restriction following Harvard law, but that's what she did. So always with good ideas, always forward looking. Again, it's like the people I have on this show, you're not going to find Rosemary Jenks with a big social media following, but it's people like that I could tell you day in, day out for 36 years she's been fighting for this issue. That's what we need. We need doers, activists, lobbyists for liberty, lobbyists for sovereignty, lobbyists for quality of life, not grifters, not TikTokers. And folks, until tomorrow, that's just the way it is. Thank you for listening. God bless you.